This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Calls are mounting to extend the 4-day truce in Gaza, which is now in its final day. Hamas backed the extension Sunday, as have international mediators Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he's open to extending the truce by 1 day for every 10 hostages released by Hamas. A total of 58 hostages have been released so far, including citizens of Thailand, the Philippines, and Russia. A 4-year-old Israeli-American girl, Abigail Edan, was among the captives released on Sunday. 117 Palestinian prisoners have been freed from Israeli prisons during the truce. Scenes of reunited families and celebrations over the weekend offered a glimpse of hope amidst the temporary lull in fighting. In the occupied West Bank, Palestinians celebrated on the streets as their loved ones returned. This is Hanan Takatka, a mother in Bethlehem whose son was freed Friday.
It was an indescribable feeling and happiness when I heard that there was a deal, thank God. In Palestine, our joy is not complete. We are happy that our children are released, but our joy is not complete. First of all, our families, children, and beloved ones in Gaza are full of blood. At the end, we were very happy for our children, but there was a price we paid. There were other children who died.
Ahead of the prisoners' release, Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir banned celebrations in East Jerusalem and ordered police to raid the homes of prisoners' families. Ben-Gvir said, quote, "My instructions are clear. There are to be no expressions of joy," unquote. Some 15,000 Palestinians have been killed since Israel's assault on Gaza began on October 7th, mostly women and children. Researchers say the death rate is unprecedented in this century. The assault has also caused mass displacement and widespread destruction, including to hospitals and other essential infrastructure. Some displaced Gazans said they were barred from re-entering the neighborhoods and homes they fled, barred by Israeli forces. Meanwhile, the Red Crescent said northern Gaza is finally getting an influx of aid thanks to the truce. As the fragile truce held through the weekend, Israeli forces continued deadly attacks on the occupied West Bank, killing at least 8 Palestinians, including 2 children. That's according to local health officials. At least 5 of those deaths came during another raid on the Jenin refugee camp. This is a resident of Jenin.
They enter houses and demolish them and damage them. They just inflict destruction. They did not arrest any youth from here. It is just a matter of destruction.
Over 200 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank have been killed by Israeli forces or settlers since October 7th. Police in Vermont have arrested a white suspect in the shooting of 3 20-year-old students of Palestinian descent Saturday. All 3 survived, though one is said to have suffered much more serious injuries. 2 of the men were wearing keffiyehs, and they were speaking Arabic at the time of the attack. The young men were identified as Hisham Aratani, a Brown University student, Kenan Abdelhamid of Haverford College, and Tassin Ahmad, a student at Trinity College. The families of the victims and advocacy groups urged authorities to investigate the shooting as a hate crime amidst a spike in anti-Arab and anti-Muslim attacks in the United States. The suspect, Jason Eaton, is being arraigned today. The 3 young men were visiting one of their grandmothers in Burlington, Vermont. They all went to the Ramallah Friends Academy for high school. Meanwhile, the Indian American Muslim Council is calling for authorities to investigate a possible hate crime motive in the November 17th stabbing of 2 Muslim students of Indian origin in Fremont, California. The attacks occurred at a busy shopping and dining area in broad daylight and left cousins Syed Shadan al-Haq and Khalid bin Masood Yafai with critical injuries. The suspect, Miguel Angel Villarreal, has been charged with 1 count of attempted first-degree murder. Here in New York, over 1,000 peaceful protesters held a sit-in Sunday at the entrance to the Manhattan Bridge, halting traffic to downtown Brooklyn. Protesters, led by Jewish Voice for Peace, unfurled banners reading, "Let Gaza live," and "The whole world is watching," as they sat in the roadway chanting, "Up with liberation, down with occupation." Their protests came 3 days after protesters disrupted the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade to demand an end to U.S. support for Israel's occupation and bombardment of Gaza. Protesters wore jumpsuits covered in fake blood and glued themselves to the street, briefly displaying banners reading, "Free Palestine" and "Genocide then, genocide now," before police moved in to arrest or detain them. In Seattle, the city council passed a resolution backing a ceasefire, the largest U.S. city to do so. But Seattle City Council member Kshama Sawant, who proposed the resolution, called it watered down after it removed condemnation of the Israeli military, the occupation of Palestine, and U.S. funding for Israel. Elsewhere, tens of thousands of Cubans, led by President Miguel Diaz-Canel, marched Thursday to the U.S. Embassy in Havana, accusing the United States of supporting Israel's genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. In Glasgow, Scotland, the BBC has been accused of censorship after the network edited calls for a Gaza ceasefire out of its coverage of an awards ceremony. This is BAFTA-winning director Ailey Monroe, who won for her short film A Long Winter, but had her acceptance speech cut from BBC's edited version posted online.
We've got a responsibility to elevate the world's most important stories, and we want to take this opportunity tonight to say that we stand in solidarity with everyone in Palestine.
Meanwhile, Israel has summoned the ambassadors of Belgium and Spain after their countries' leaders spoke at the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza Friday, condemning Israeli attacks against Palestinian civilians. This is Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez.
Absolutely necessary to establish a lasting humanitarian ceasefire to reverse the catastrophic situation that the people of the street are going through.
In New York, the former director of NYU Langone Hospital's Cancer Center has filed a lawsuit after he was fired for sharing racist cartoons of Arab people on social media, as well as several messages against Palestinians, including one questioning the scale of the death toll in Gaza due to Israel's nonstop bombardment. Dr. Benjamin Neal is accusing NYU Langone Health of violating city and state human rights laws. His firing came after NYU Langone first removed a Palestinian medical resident from one of its hospitals. Dr. Zaki Massoud posted messages on social media in solidarity with Palestine. Neal responded saying he had been, quote, offered up as a sacrificial lamb so NYU Langone could claim impartiality. In the Netherlands, the far-right Islamophobic populist Geert Wilders has vowed to become the next Dutch prime minister after his Freedom Party won the most votes in last week's parliamentary election. But Wilders will first have to make agreements with at least 2 other parties to form a government. Other Dutch politicians have expressed reticence or outright refused to back Wilders, who has advocated banning the Quran, prohibiting Islamic schools and mosques, and denying entry to asylum seekers. In 2017, he referred to Moroccan immigrants as scum during a campaign event. He's also made anti-trans remarks. Wilders' victory has rocked the mostly liberal nation, and European neighbors are also facing threats of a shift to the far right. Protesters took to the streets of Utrecht on Thursday evening.
This is needed because my kids, adults, a lot of people woke up in this country and we are worried if they are still welcome here.
This is not the country I fell in love with, which I love so much. The country I love is a country in which we hold each other tight and live together.
In other protest, 4 Greenpeace activists jumped into the Parliament pond in The Hague to protest Geert Wilders, who's threatened to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement and slash spending on the climate crisis. Ukraine's military says it shot down 71 of 75 drones launched by Russia Saturday in what officials are calling the largest such attack since Russia's invasion early last year. At least 2 people were injured in Kyiv, where falling debris sparked fires at residential buildings and kindergarten. The Russian drone attacks came just days after U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visited Kyiv, where he announced another $100 million in military aid for Ukraine. The United Nations reports over 10,000 civilians have been killed in Ukraine since Russia invaded. In Dublin, Ireland, hundreds of far-right protesters fought street battles with police Thursday in riots that erupted after a knife attack at a school that left 5 people injured, including 3 children. Police say the rioters were driven by misinformation about the knife attack, which was blamed on an immigrant. The BBC reports the attacker was in fact an Irish citizen who's lived in Ireland for 20 years. Anti-immigration protests erupted in Ireland this year after the government received more than 140,000 immigrants, its highest total in 15 years. Thousands of people took to the streets in cities around the world Saturday to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. An estimated 50,000 people turned out in Rome as protesters demanded justice for a 22-year-old student who was recently killed by her ex-boyfriend in a case that's rocked Italy. In Guatemala, demonstrators wrote out the number 438 with candles in a tribute to the women who've been killed so far this year. Meanwhile, in Argentina, women condemned the agenda of the newly elected president, far-right libertarian Javier Milei.
I think everything the new government of Javier Milei stands for infringes on the rights we have won. The right to abortion, the fight against patriarchal violence, and even the fight for gender equality in the workplace. I am convinced that we have hard times ahead.
In Australia, police arrested over 100 climate activists who took part in a 2-day blockade of the world's largest coal port. Thousands of activists participated in the blockade, occupying the port of Newcastle by swimming or kayaking in the port's shipping lane. Australia is the world's 2nd largest exporter of coal. 97-year-old Reverend Alan Stewart was one of the detained activists. Organizers say he's the oldest person ever arrested and charged in Australia. Reverend Stewart spoke to reporters after the action.
Whatever happens to me doesn't matter, but what happens to the climate, because the climate is going to affect future generations, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on.
In Oregon, thousands of teachers are expected to return to work today after reaching a historic tentative agreement with the Portland Public Schools. The deal reached Sunday came more than 3 weeks after teachers at 81 Portland area schools walked out on strike. The Portland Association of Teachers Union said the tentative deal had secured key wins, including demands for higher wages, class size limits, and more time to plan lessons. Thousands of Amazon workers across Europe went on strike on Black Friday, one of the busiest shopping days of the year, protesting the retail giant's working conditions and demanding fair wages. The global campaign Make Amazon Pay said strikes and protests would take place from Friday through today in at least 30 countries. In Coventry, England, over 1,000 Amazon warehouse workers walked off the job Friday, blocking the facility's entrance and preventing trucks from leaving. This is a trade union leader.
In the protest here, we've got people joining us from Germany, from the US, from Italy. There are also Spanish workers that are out on strike today. This is now a global wake-up call for Amazon. They can't keep ignoring the concerns of these workers and the workers in warehouses right across the world. It's clear that this is a huge momentous thing that Amazon just need to listen to.
And Pablo Gusman, the visionary former Minister of Information of the Young Lords and longtime print and television reporter, has died of a heart attack. In 1969, Gusman co-founded the New York chapter of the predominantly Puerto Rican radical group, the Young Lords, which fought against police brutality, racism, U.S. imperialism, and militarism. The Young Lords also provided health care, child care, and breakfast to impoverished people, most of them Black and Latino. Pablo Gusman went on to write for publications including The Village Voice and Rolling Stone, and spent nearly 2 decades at the New York station WCBS. His longtime friend, Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez, called Gusman the best street reporter on TV. We'll have more on Pablo Gusman tomorrow on Democracy Now! And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.